Good morning, everyone. Gearing up for the next normal is the subject of our discussion today. I think it's fair to say that all of us have been deeply affected by the current crisis. I've been living and operating out of Singapore since 1995, and I can say that with the exception of the Asia financial crisis in the late 1990s, I've never experienced anything like this. Personally and professionally, we're all dealing with a new reality, working to make adjustments, holding together our families, friends, and communities. And on the business front, trying to understand, how the world has changed and how we can best adapt. For the past 55 years, Singapore has grown to find its place in the world. Today, it stands out as an exemplar of what a global business center should be. Unfortunately, its underpinnings are that of an entrepot, a center of commerce for the region and for the world. As countries and economies withdraw to increasingly manage their own affairs, globalization and economic integration are at risk. This, as many of you are well aware, has consequences for Singapore. So how we as a small island nation are dependent on the world economy, how we will reformat ourselves is a big question. How will all of you with businesses that rely on neighboring markets and trade be able to survive? There is some good news. We aren't entirely cut off. Supply chains are still operating, and fortunately, we're still able to allow cross-border transportation of goods and some services. How we work, however, has changed now and perhaps forever. This session is designed to share with you ways in which we might adjust both to cope in the near term and not only to survive, but to thrive in the medium to long term. We have for you a discussion in 3 parts. I'll have the honor and pleasure of being your panel host today. My name is Steve Stein. I'm founder and host of the Inside Asia podcast. I work primarily with boards and leadership teams in the region, helping them address 21st century challenges and building better leadership teams and strategies. Joining me on the panel are Vaughn Ryan. He's Managing Director for Consumer Intelligence at Nielsen Asia. We have Sean Tan, Chairman of the Board and Director of True Group, which has 24 so-called big box gyms in Singapore and Taiwan under the brands True Fitness and TFX. We also have Jonatas Mello, Senior Vice President, Asia South at Bourage. Bourage is a manufacturer of polymers used largely in the production of packaging and other industrial and consumer products. The company is a joint venture of the Abu Dhabi National Oil Company and Borealis of Austria. Our panelists will share with you a few insights and tips, and hopefully this will inspire your own thinking. Vaughn will kick off with some current research on how consumer buying patterns and tastes and preferences have changed in the wake of COVID-19. It's a B2C story, and for any of you who are engaged in the production, sale, and post-sale service consumer products, perhaps this will help guide your thinking. We'll then explore the world of B2C services and hear from Sean and how he and his organization are making adjustments in a time of lockdown and social distancing. And then we'll turn finally to a B2B story. Many of you are in the business of providing products and services as inputs to the B2C sector. Demand patterns have flattened or changed. Planning is no longer what it once was. And as a result of this global crisis, B2B operations may be subject to a new set of demands and constraints. We have 3 short survey questions for our audience, and we will also pause after each segment to allow for questions and some brief debate. We encourage your questions. Please enter them into the chat box or raise your hand and we will recognize you or do our best to do so. So without further ado, let me turn to Vaughn and ask him to share with us some of his firm's recent findings on regional consumer trends in a post-COVID world. But before we do that, let's present the first of 3 survey questions. Emmeline, would you mind? So which areas of business are you in? And if you just let us know, that way we can address our comments to you and to the audience and tailor perhaps some of the commentary around this. I'll give you just a few seconds to respond. Okay, that gives us a good feel. Thank you very much. So we've got a lot of B2B in here, but obviously the implications are what you do have implications for those in the B2C world. So I guess at this point, if we wouldn't mind, Vaughn, over to you. Please share with us some of your thoughts and insights.
Thanks, Steve, and thanks, Emmeline, for the opportunity to present to the Chamber today. Like Steve said, we're going to talk to you a little bit about how the retail environment has changed. I'm sure Emmeline will put up the charts in a second if you wouldn't mind. I'm not going to take you through 50 or 60 charts today, although there's that much information out there. It's more about moving forward and how consumers are going to behave into the immediate future. I did a similar event for another group back in January, and a guy called me up in May and said to me, everything you told me in January was wrong. It's been turned upside down. And my comment back to him was, well, no, where I thought the world would be in 2023 or in 2024, it is today. What COVID has done is basically given us an injection of incredible speed and forced the world down the pathway in many ways to new retailing behaviours and new consumer behaviours that we knew were going to happen, but have been expedited. Emmeline, if you could just go to the next chart, please. At Nielsen, we decided that we needed to start forecasting what happened. And we went through these 6 stages originally of the new consumer behaviour. Things at the beginning, which we were all well aware of, such as proactive health buying, reactive health management, pantry preparation, which we saw here in Singapore, and some of the abnormal behaviours like toilet paper being taken off the shelves. Then we started to get into this quarantine living prep as the circuit breaker news started to evolve. And then clearly the restricted living. Where we're at today, though, is this living a new normal. And for many of us, this is the reality of not just the next few weeks or months, but it could be prolonged for years. Our behaviours are not going to go back to the way they were back in February or January before this really started to evolve. However, what we're going to see is a process by which consumers go through. Initially, there is going to be a rebound. And we're starting to see that in Singapore today. You only have to go to a restaurant or try and get a booking on a Friday night, and you can see people are trying to get back to the way it was. I'm sure there's frustrations with the ways and how many people can sit at a table, but it's the new future. The other interesting aspect is, despite seeing a rebound, we're also seeing some new consequences. And this is where we're starting to get into this reboot phase. This is this exacerbated consequences of being in a lockdown for so long. People are not rushing back to the office. People are working more from home. And this is going to be a trend that will exist for at least the next couple of years. And then as we get into Q1, we'll start to see the longer term impacts of the economy. And we'll start to see how this really starts to react to the way consumers shop, behave, act in their daily impact when they start to realize their financial situation isn't as good as it was beforehand. If we could just go to the next chart, please. What this chart shows you is how e-commerce specifically has behaved both pre-COVID and realistically during the COVID process. Across the world, the average market has seen 30% growth of e-commerce. For many of us, we've had to do this. We haven't had a choice. In markets such as Malaysia, where e-commerce was less than 1%, it's grown significantly over the last 3 years, already up to 5, but it's driven another 3 points of growth in terms of FMCG sales, up to 8%. This was forced because of the proximity by which consumers could shop in. In Singapore, we already had strong trends and it continues to grow. And I guess the big outtake for me out of this is not everyone suffered because of COVID. Over 55% of FMCG manufacturers around the world had strong growth in the first half of the year. Sure, some suffered. Sure, there was a large percentage, and we all hear the doom and gloom stories. But for a number of our customers that we work with at Nielsen, they've had their best year ever and the best first 6 months of the year. So there are some companies that have done exceptionally well out of this. There's probably a sense of guilt, but I guess for most of us, we're sitting back saying, well, it's better that some companies continue to grow because they're going to be the future. If we just go to the next chart, please. I spoke a little bit earlier about this life in rebound and where we're at today, and I just wanted to dig a little bit deeper into this and what this specifically means. There's a lot going on in this chart, but I'll go into a little bit of detail. What we are going to see is consumers will demand more precautions everywhere and will demand this 24/7. We can already see this in the market. We can see hygiene being really paramount. We know that stores are starting to talk about masks and temperature checks all the time. Sanitation. I got in a Grab last night and there was hand sanitizer freely available for me to use. We're gravitating to more open rather than confined places. We prefer outdoor events. We prefer larger supermarkets, for example, over small little supermarkets. We're avoiding indoor events. We're avoiding places such as cinemas and restaurants, which are too confined for us. We want space. We're valuing our personal space more so than ever before. We're socializing at arm's length. We're avoiding store queues. We're avoiding anywhere where we can potentially have contact with people that we're not in regular contact with. We're limiting our touch points. We're opting for cashless, tap and go, self-service, contactless encounters. We're opting for virtual before physical engagement. Workplace meetings, banking, medical consultations have all moved down this pathway. We're looking at confined proximity. So we're staying within our local areas and we're trying to help our local. We're seeing local patronage really grow. We're staying within our local neighbourhood stores, our markets, our entertainments and our takeaways. And we're appreciating the essentials. We're simplifying our meals. We're weighing up the benefits. We're rationing some of our usage as well. The things that we found that were hard to get during the circuit breaker. We're conscious that a wave 2 or a wave 3 could hit us at some stage. And we're assisting and supporting local brands. And this is a big one and a big opportunity, particularly for SMEs. The business, the communities, the brands, the retailers, where they're made, how they're made, who owns them has become incredibly important. And we're exercising financial restraint right now because we're worried it's only going to get worse before it gets better. The final thing I talk about our life in rebound, we're authenticating information more so than ever before. What you say you can do, you must do. If you don't, you will lose me forever. Authentication is the most important element today. So if you have a health benefit to me, I'm all into it. As we move forward into this life in reboot, what we're going to start to see is we're going to move from appreciating the essentials to reliant upon essentials. As incomes become even more constrained, consumers will weigh up benefits and ration usage and eliminate discretionary consumption. We'll move from local patronage to deeper reliance on local, as global and national supply chains are already under some pressure, and we've seen this with wave 2s in various countries around the globe. We'll start to really depend upon our local and micro-local providers to deliver what they need from where they know the product is coming from, and will want to understand the logistics management of products. We'll move from exercising financial restraint to severe personal financial restriction. We can't help but do this. So many people have been made unemployed or their security of job is at tenterhooks today. So no one can really guarantee they're going to have a job in 12 months' time at the moment. And we're going to see huge levels of social solidarity. We're already seeing this. We've seen the levels that the community's got around, but it's interesting as we start to move into life and reinvent, it's not always going to be that way. Questions are starting to be asked around the world of who's at fault and fingers being pointed, not just in the US, not just in China, but around other countries which are typically more conservative and have a lot more social solidarity. As we move into this life and reinvent, we're going to move from appreciating to reliant to surviving on basic essentials. Many consumers will have experienced severe economic, financial and employment impacts with livelihoods and incomes severely diminished. We'll move from local patronage to reliance to deeper dependence on micro and local. With supply deeply disrupted or diminished, consumers will be extremely dependent on micro-local suppliers to provide basic goods at affordable prices. And we'll move from financial restraint to constraint to desperation. So consumers will be deeply impacted, and many constrained spenders will completely reliant upon grants, financial and food support for basic living. And that last point will be, we'll move from social solidarity to social backlash, particularly against governments, health providers, employers, financial institutions, brands and retailers who have not supported or taken care of their populations. Potentially, this is going to be lesser where the government's concerned in Singapore, but certainly for retailers and brands, it's going to be critical that you are seen as someone that's invested in supporting the economy and the consumers longer term. If we just move to the next chart, please. I'm not going to go through all of these in detail, but what is going to happen is the consumption behaviours are going to change. We're going to clearly see wallet adjustments due to income uncertainty, and the percentage of spend, particularly in categories like FMCG, of our wallet that we're spending on FMCG products is going to increase significantly. So we are going to shop around. We're going to look online. We're going to look for the cheapest price. We're going to look for alternatives all the time. loyalty is going to be challenged. There's an opportunity here to revise pricing mechanics. Over the period of time, particularly during the circuit breaker, where products and stocks unavailability became really difficult for consumers to buy what they want when they want, they started to buy whatever was available, and price did become a little less important. We talk a lot at Nielsen around promotional junkies, where we only ever buy on price or on sale. This changed over those last 3 or 4 months in Singapore, and there's an opportunity here to re-educate consumers around what value actually is. We can see that there's a re-ranking or considerations of products, values and attributes. Some aspects will become more important, others will rank a lot lower than they were beforehand. And like I mentioned, origin preferences are going to become huge. Where it came from, how it got there, what countries did it come from? If it was from a country that had high levels of COVID, I don't want to touch it, versus somewhere which is more safe, I'm all in. Well, overall, we're going to re-establish our brand relationships and our affinity after a dark period. All of our messaging should be around refreshing our narratives, our tone and placement based on where audiences now assess and interact with content. If we can just go to the next chart, please. This chart basically shows across Thailand, India and Vietnam, what were the top 5 benefit claims consumers are willing to pay more for. And clearly what it comes back to is around health and safety, around nutrition, around the values of making sure that I feel better. You're going to make me feel, going to give me a better chance of, 1, surviving COVID-19, 2, staying healthy throughout this whole process. And it really shows you that the attribute importance needs to be reassessed. This is an opportunity for us to really scream about our businesses if we're based in Singapore, because we have got a good track record. We understand where the supply network has come from. We really must do this. If we just go to the next chart, please. What is going to happen within the retail environment is a reduction of the amount of products on the shelf. This is in FMCG again, and it looks at retail within supermarkets in Singapore. But what I can tell you, for example, in beer, 66% of the items that are on the shelf account for just 2% of the sales. Because availability becomes such a big issue and we don't want multiple hands touching our products, we are going to see a reduction in the amount of items on shelves. We're going to see the advent of more value brands and private label become available, and products with great origins or preferences that are based on safety and health are going to take more share of shelf within supermarkets, hypermarkets, and even online, because retailers have recognized they must have the product when a consumer wants it. Availability is going to become a core issue for us. If we can just go to the next chart, please. This overall is really about navigating a real retail reset. For us, it's about hygiene. Clearly, we know that that's going to be a massive issue. In-store hygiene, a new baseline is going to be established in the world. We must rethink our packaging. Things such as fresh food areas and deli departments have to redo what they're doing today. We're not comfortable with how many people might have touched the apple before I go and buy it. We want to have a look at how that can be improved. Availability and supply, after all the supply disruptions, are really going to be important. We need to secure trust that when my customer comes to my store, I have product available. The support for local and of a specific origin are never going to be stronger than right now. And if you've got that as a strength in your business, you must scream it. You've got to leverage the loyalty that you have today to really preserve the priority relationships that you've already developed. Really talk to your customers about them helping you and you helping Singapore if it's in that particular case, or if you're in another market, making sure you talk about that. We have to redefine our sales activation activities. There's an opportunity to really create a new value definition, and we can start to reimagine what shelving and layouts, etc., of our store start to look like. We can re-inspire the retail experience, both online and offline. Things such as FMCG taking a larger share of the wallet. We can start to look at easier online experiences. We've all had good and bad experiences over the last 6 months. We can look at augmented reality trips, personalized services, chatbots. We're going to eat in a lot more, guys. This is the new reality. We are going to eat from home a lot more. We're working from home a lot more. How can we adapt to this new challenge? There's an opportunity for meal boxes, chef-inspired dinners, meal planning services. We can reconsider the whole role of the store and the retail footprint. We can move to more showrooming, minimum stock levels, and direct delivery to home, pop-up shops within to improve experience and create a home of innovation. And finally, this is all going to be underpinned by technology. Technology is going to be the way that we can do this. We've got time to scale, scan and go, contactless checkouts. We can re-envisage the online experience. We can partner with manufacturers to create technology-driven supply transparency to gain trust. That's all from me, Steve. Back to you.
Bon, thank you for that. Thanks for those comments, and it does shed some light on the situation we're in right now. I mean, let me kick off with one question that came to mind. You mentioned an anticipation of greater reliance on local versus global providers of goods. Is this an expression of support for one's home market? In other words, are people saying, well, in support of my country right now because our economy is faltering, I'm going to buy local? Or is it just, more motivated by concerns that what's available today may not be available to tomorrow, so I might as well make the switch to a local provider?
I think it's probably more the former to begin with. I think it's more about supporting local jobs, supporting local market environments. It's also the understanding of where the product has gone or where the service is coming from. Consumers are really heavily concerned. I know there's lots of myths out there at the moment. New Zealand had a wave again, a second wave of COVID. And one of the accusations was that it was caught from meat that had been shipped from Australia to New Zealand. I think since scientists have said that can't happen, but there still is a lot of sensitivities from consumers about where products are from and how they actually get to the shelf, or who's going to service me, where have they been over that period of time.
So food security, just knowing health and safety and knowing what, having more traceable insights in terms of where my food's coming from. How does that dovetail with some of the pressures that were already coming from people who were worried about slaughterhouses or availability of certain products, meat products primarily, or some vegetables and fruits? Is this just, again, an example of accelerating how now there will need to be almost kind of notifications on products that say this has been verified, validated, it has been handled in a certain way?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why I said at the beginning, this is all the trends that we expected to happen over the next 3 to 5 years have happened in the 3 to 5 month period. Everything's been expedited. We were already concerned about where food was coming from, food miles, the environmental impact, food safety. And in particular, it's been an enormous issue in Asia for some time. And all that COVID has done has expedited the process of information that a consumer wants and needs.
So for some of our members of the audience who may have been traders or suppliers of product importers, is there any specific advice in terms of certain protocols or certain standards that perhaps they should look to in order to rethink how they bring their products in, present them to their retailers, change the game in terms of the need and the desire for their products over other global products?
Yeah, absolutely. And the key here is to communicate to consumers and be ready to communicate today. If you haven't already got the message, you're probably a little late, but you've got to have a positive message for this. If it's a negative message, consumers will find out and the reaction to you will be more than negative. They'll tell a lot of people right now. So brands are going to be challenged.
So do you suspect then that some of the retailers will then need to create communications plans with their B2B, with their suppliers, so that they could actually articulate the same story, the same narrative? Like, we have guarantees from our providers of these apples in this country that they are, and so that when people are reading or reviewing or thinking about it, they're going to know. I mean, and maybe to technology, are there QR codes or other types of ability where you can actually see the QR code, read about the product, its origins, its health and safety standards? What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. And we were already seeing this trend. So this is a trend that's not new. It's just being expedited in terms of the speed with which it's coming in. Yeah. In Italy, for example, you can go into a store, into supermarkets. There's a big supermarket chain there called Co-op. Ironic, because there's plenty of co-ops around the world. But you can find out how far the apples have traveled from, which farm they actually come from. And it'll have a descriptor of how far away the farm is, what season they were picked in, where they actually were stored during that period of time, if you want to understand more information on those particular apples. And I think that's going to become the future here. I know retailers in Singapore especially are about to adapt more and more to this. So we're going to see more of this in the market.
Donatus, this speaks, I know we're on the B2B side, this speaks to packaging and some of the packaging innovations. Do you have any thoughts or comments on this and what you're seeing, any demands coming through your organization or your suppliers right now to change some of the things that you're doing?
I was about to ask exactly the same question for Van Hyen, just to get a different perspective other than ours. But on a very macro level, I think what Van Hyen have said, especially around the consumers don't want too many people touching their apples, or they want to know and what is the traceability around that. Packaging plays a very important role, right? So advanced package solutions both guarantee that there is minimization on that, there is less food waste, and also allow the traceability that we are talking about after packaging. Yeah, you could potentially permeate sealing to allow to guarantee that that sealing is not broken. And we have seen many solutions going on that direction, especially if you combine now with the idea of circularity. We are talking about packaging solutions that are actually monomaterial, as we call, so polyethylene pure materials that allow that to happen. And it's definitely enabling a lot of what Van Hyen say. Yeah, and we see very big brand owners with that direction as well.
There's a lot of debate about how long this situation will persist, whether or not it is seasonal or whether or not it's going to be for the long run. But I'm hearing you all say that, at least in your businesses and the way that you're looking at these markets, that these are adaptations which are necessary and will not reverse themselves. In other words, this is going to be part of what one does to supply retailers. There's no choice. You're going to have to make these commitments. And I suspect assume these additional costs of packaging, presentation, information, communication. How does a small retailer manage this, particularly in a small market like Singapore?
Yeah, that's a massive challenge, right? That's for them. It's a case of do or don't survive. You don't have a choice, but you can turn this around into a competitive advantage because a lot of retailers will disappear. Yeah. You have to move to use technology. One of the most interesting factors that's come out of this is the offline to online. And what I mean by this, in Singapore, things like Grab delivery have just thrived throughout COVID. And it's not just in younger community groups that are using this. One of the most interesting aspects, the fastest adoption rate has been in over 60-year-olds and above, right? So people that traditionally haven't really adapted to e-commerce at any level, they're the ones ordering the most right now, and they're fascinated with it. And I think if I'm a local retailer, I need to adapt to that fast. I need to make that availability. We've seen restaurants in Singapore that never would have thought of going down this pathway are doing it every minute of the day now, and they're doing it quite successfully.
Is it possible that, just thinking about the integration of Singapore with the rest of the region and its entrepot positioning, could Singapore position itself as a repackager of these products for then coming in, processing, packaging, coding, and then sending back out to the region, to perhaps more to the high end markets, in those different, in KL, Jakarta, Manila, elsewhere? But is there a role based on Singapore's core reputation as just, highly efficient, clean, and capable? I mean, I'm just wondering if that's just too much supply chain effort. Any thoughts?
Yeah, you've got to remember that value is still really important, and value has two different meanings. Price is certainly an element of value, and we don't have consumers that are going to have more cash in their pocket than they did beforehand. Most are going to have less, or they're going to be restricted at some point. And I think the logistics management of products is going to become really critical. Less contact is going to be a good thing. So I'm just a bit cautious there on that one.
Yeah, just a sidebar, but Singapore has been experimenting in vertical farming, and you can see in the northern part, there are extraordinary technology-driven farms in order to optimize land available. And for a while, some preferential grants were being given to people who wanted to get into the business. I would suspect now, if anybody is a provider or supplier in the food industry, locally sourcing would be more important than ever before. and the degree to which you can compete, that's going to be a boom market. Any thoughts or reflections, or do you all have any access or insights on that?
It's interesting you say that, because ASEAN believe there's an opportunity to create an ASEAN food structure and really thrive upon, again, the whole ASEAN approach to where food has come from. And rather than create a nationalism that made in Vietnam for Vietnamese only, why can't made in Vietnam for Southeast Asians entirety? I think that's an enormous opportunity. And I think for Singapore as well, it can play an enormous role. To your point, it can become the surveyor of making sure that all of these policies are true and living up to their reputations that they're trying to claim.
Just one other point of clarification as well. You mentioned earlier an anticipated reduction in the number of available items on shelves. Is that a reflection of a retailer's need to better and more closely manage its inventory in terms of its turns? Or is it really more just saying that the expectation is consumer interests have narrowed and therefore they won't be so picky as selective, and maybe it's a much needed almost clearing, if you will, of slow moving goods? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, let's not kid ourselves. Retailers are still in the business of making money. So if they can rationalize their range, they know they can carry more stock turned inventory, so it's more profitable for them. So they're going to take this opportunity as well. And that's the right thing and smart thing for them to do. At the same time, a really interesting side story, I had a pasta supplier contact me and ask the question, if they can't buy my Italian-made pasta, would a consumer buy another pasta? And we did the study, and what I found is, to most consumers, a pasta is a pasta. And forgive me for any Italian lovers on the phone, on the call.
A lot of hate mail.
Yeah, exactly. I'm going to get lots of death threats now. I can tell that, even from my family. But the reality of it all is, throughout COVID, it was about availability, right? And that was the most important aspect. So to your point, what you made, Steve, it's about the ease of restocking shelves is such a critical thing for supermarkets. On average, every supermarket has 8% out of stocks every day, right? That's massive. That's a lot of lost dollars.
I noticed during the lockdown period, if anything, if shops were able to provide some service, they put stands out front. So you might have been a restaurant, but you're selling, fresh vegetables or pastas or other things like that, almost so people could go back and replicate perhaps the restaurant experience they were having. Do you anticipate that at least the restaurant here in Singapore will continue to create shops or storefronts, or you can go home and make this yourself? Or was that just a fad, to bridge the decrease in revenue from the restaurants being open or closed?
Yeah, it was a bit of desperation, let's face it. For some of them, it was about cash turn and making sure they could get some of their stock out at the door. But I think some of the smarter ones will actually start to get into the retail business. And when you talk to major retailers around the region, their fear isn't necessarily just each other, and it's not just e-com. It is all these little people biting away at their ankles with selling a little bit of meat or vegetables or sauces, which they weren't doing beforehand. So certainly. Right.
And we saw this trend, I think, prior. I mean, there were niche businesses, and again, towards the high end, Sasha's Fine Foods, or the fishmonger, where it's basically only salmon from New Zealand, and that's all they did in a tiny little shop house. And you were seeing those kinds of businesses popping up. So, do you think we'll find category retailing versus broad based? I mean, you mentioned before big shopping environments because you don't want to close proximity. At the other hand, if you have e-commerce and you have delivery, perhaps specializing, and because with the ease of use, could that be a trend that we see? And would you encourage people in food retailing to pursue or think about that option?
Yeah, back in November, I was in an event and I talked about that the true currency around the world today was time, and time was the ultimate money for us all, right? And that's why convenience was the biggest factor around how we shopped, where we shopped, why we shopped. And we're seeing this growth of stores such as 7-Elevens and Family Marts around Asia, which is growing exponentially. What convenience has become is deliver it to me at home, because I'm home all the time now, or someone's going to be home multiple days, where in the past, the time slots were really difficult to fill because I was only home from 6 to 9, Monday to Wednesday, between my gym visits and everything else that I was doing. To answer the question, without a doubt, they're going to continue to grow, and those niche markets are going to grow in terms of their importance by what they actually sell and being real experts in certain areas. And that's what consumers want. However, the one watch out here is that consumers don't want 20 delivery people coming to their house every week. Yeah. And that's the opportunity for groups like Grabs and Ubers and Food Pandas around the world to be that delivery source, to bring it together so I only have to get 1 or 2 deliveries, because I don't want contact with 20 different delivery drivers.
Right. Is there room in the market here for other consolidators, others that could do this, or do you feel like the market's well served now?
Yeah, I'm probably not an expert enough in that area, but right now I think, at the beginning of COVID, it certainly couldn't handle it. We all saw that. But as we started to expand and time's going on, it looks like it's actually handling it a lot better. In fact, it's one of the best in the world in terms of its delivery cycles.
All right, excellent. Any other questions from the panel? If not, I would like to maybe shift. And Vaughn, thank you so much for your insights and for your research. Do appreciate that. We're going to toggle a little bit and talk about really the B2C space, but in services. And before we do that, if you don't mind, Emmeline, let's put up the second survey question. So in terms of sales, how has your business been impacted by COVID-19 crisis? This is for us to gauge from the audience, how severe have you felt this? And I know this is going to cut across B2B and B2C, but we just want to gauge how serious it's been for you. I'll give you a few minutes or a few seconds on. Yeah, wow. Okay, that's really important to see, and I'm sorry for all of you, because this just indicates just how severe it's been. So despite some of the good stories and the silver lining out there, and how some organizations have been able to persevere. In fact, I even hear among the restaurant groups, because the bars are closed, the restaurants are doing some of their best business ever. So I guess it depends where you are and how you're positioned, and it's luck of the draw to a large degree. So Sean, this kind of then leads us into talking about some of the challenges you're having, and if you wouldn't mind, please tell us a little bit about your business and some of the things that you're now working on.
Sure, Steve. So we're in the gym business, and we own and operate what are known as big box gyms. So it's everything under one roof. We have everything from fitness equipment on the gym floor. We have group exercise classes. We've got yoga classes. We've got personal training, and we operate 24 of these across 2 countries, for Singapore and in Taiwan. In Singapore, we've got 10 of them, and in Taiwan, we've got 14, and we operate under 2 brands, True Fitness and TFX. In Taiwan, we have one more brand called Yoga Edition, and that's just a yoga center. It was, I think, COVID and the circuit breaker lockdown was very, very, I think it was very, very interesting and challenging for us. Very early on, we saw this coming from about Chinese New Year this year. We see it hit, saw it hit China, and it was coming through, and we made preparations for it. But to be honest, I think no amount of preparations can quite prepare you for what was going to hit. So like all other businesses, we were shut down from early April onwards, and we reopened sometime just after the middle of June. The business was affected, and it was very interesting for us, because the moment physical gyms are shut down, we were running a brick and mortar business, right? And everyone in the fitness business had some sort of a digital plan and their online plan. But in reality, what that digital plan was, it wasn't a very well thought out plan or strategy. It was more about how do you make your app or your website a little bit better, more functionality. I think no one foresaw the day when our actual physical gyms was going to be shut down. We'd not have access to the gyms at all, and everything had to be online. So when we were shut down, everybody scrambled, right? So we were putting all kinds of content online. Production quality was not the best. The sound, the videos were not the best, because our instructors were filming from their homes, from their handphones, etc. And we learned a lot. Some lessons that we learned during COVID-19 and that lockdown. We saw a spike in demand for online content. And there was this whole big debate, and we tried it as well, whether or not this content could be charged for. So would we be able to charge our members and get them to pay something for this online content? Because that would be some revenue for us. Or would we have to give it out free? One thing that we learned was very early on was that, when you run a brick and mortar gym business, your competitor is the gym down the street. We compete based on locality and what's convenient for our members to come. And then, of course, we compete on services as well. But proximity and location was a big part of that. But then, the moment you go online, there are no geographical boundaries whatsoever. And we realized that, around the world, there were so many instructors who were giving out content free of charge. I always laugh when I say, one of the guys who was giving out a lot of free content was Chris Hemsworth, the guy who plays Thor, and it was free. And a lot of our members were saying, "Wow, Chris Hemsworth is giving a free instructional videos and free workouts. Let's go follow that." And like I told my guys, I said, "Look, how do we compete with Thor? How do you win that battle?" So the difficulty is when people and very well-known personalities or people who are charismatic, who look better, are giving stuff online for free, we can't charge for it. So most of us were just getting by with just offering that content free. If we use the online platforms as a way to engage with our members, we wanted to keep them engaged. We were looking forward to the day when we could physically reopen our gyms again. Fortunately, that day when we had to reopen our gyms didn't come too far down the road. And what we did see is the moment we open our gyms, albeit with capacity restrictions, we were restricted to 50 members at any one point in time in our gyms, regardless of the size of our gyms. But the moment our gyms were open, you could see that our online viewership numbers just fell off the cliff and they just plummeted, right? Everybody was, I think it was a bit of Zoom fatigue, online fatigue. They wanted to get out there. They wanted to go back into the gyms. That was what our surveys and our feedback from our members were showing us. Members wanted to get back into the gyms. But then they realized that it was difficult getting a booking slot, because if you have 5,000 members and all are competing to get 50 slots for, in a 2-hour time slot, you have difficulty in getting that workout in. You can't get your time slot. To sort of compensate for that, we decided to ramp up our online models again. Now, just to let you know what we were doing during our period of lockdown, we were doing a lot of pre-recorded content because we felt that at that point in time, pre-recorded content, we could somehow tweak it. We get the sound quality and the production quality a little bit better, right? But when we reopened and people were getting frustrated, they couldn't get a booking in, we then decided to do live streaming content on platforms like Zoom from our clubs. So for example, the instructor would be there giving a live lesson. There'd be 10 people in that class. That was the maximum that we could do. But we'd have a camera, we'd film it live. So for those who wanted to attend that particular class, this was their favorite class, this was their favorite instructor, they could still follow it at home. And we saw that the online viewership then spiked again. And this has continued to be so. So these are sort of interesting lessons. We see the difference in that. And if you ask me, why was there that difference? A drop in your online viewership and why the spike again? The spike, and we surveyed this and we realized that the spike was really because the members could identify with the instructors. Although the production quality, the sound wasn't perfect, it wasn't studio quality, but they saw an authenticity. They could relate to the instructors. The instructors, through the period of lockdown, had learned how to engage with the members. They knew how to, even though they, all they could see was a phone or a camera, they realized that there were members on the other side of that, and they were engaging them, and they were trying to talk to them, communicate with them, encourage them to join in what they were doing. And members appreciated this. So these are some of the learnings that we took away from our circuit breaker. Revenues right now, I mean, for the businesses, we're all, very similar to what the survey results shown. We're tracking way below what we were doing pre-COVID. What is now interesting for us is how the business and how we plan for the business going forward. Vaughan had a fantastic, presentation, and he gave a lot of insights, on how consumer patterns are changing. Our business, the gym business, is very similar. We liken it to like a retail business, like the F&B business. Our gyms are located in shopping malls. We depend on customer traffic coming in. And we're actually in the middle, I think the industry is in the middle of sort of having this whole big think through on what the gym of the future will be. There was some early debate on whether or not the gym of the future would be a digital gym, whether the brick and mortar gyms would go away altogether. But I think the consensus from the industry, after doing a lot of surveys amongst members, is that the gym of the future is probably going to be a hybrid. There's still going to be a brick and mortar physical location, whether that location will be only in central business districts or whether we will start to see more locations near where the residential areas are, because more people are going to be working from home and not coming into the offices. That remains to be seen. But it seems to be that the brick and mortar is here to stay, but we're going to have a hybrid offering. So the gyms are also going to start offering online digital content, both pre-recorded as well as live streaming. And that would be something which will be seamless. We will be looking at delivering all this, online content across the various channels, the different platforms, to make it seamless, basically, for members, so they can have that optionality. They can choose whether they want to come in to have that workout, or whether they want to, to come in and do the workout at home. One thing, when I was listening to Vaughan, one thing that came to mind was this. When you see the whole economy changing and the consumer trends and the way we are consuming goods and services changing, these are my observations, right? For stuff which the online experience is not going to take away so much of what the physical experience is going to be. People would be quite happy to do stuff online. I'll give you an example. Grocery shopping. There's no real enhanced experience of going to a supermarket. In fact, in this day and age, you probably feel safer at home ordering stuff and having it delivered. There's no big difference there. F&B, if you want, most of the time, especially when budgetary constraints are concerned, when people are looking at reduced incomes, right? They wouldn't mind ordering in or buying local. You go to the hawker center, you go to the food court, you buy in and you eat at home. Once in a while, or on the weekends as a splurge, you might want to go out and you might want to enjoy that social experience. You want to meet your friends, you want to have a treat. You go out, and that experience, dining out, no matter what you do, I don't think that can be replicated at home. And we've seen the same in our industry, in the health and fitness, in the gym industry. If you really ask and you survey and you ask members, what is it like doing an online workout at home? Most will tell you it can't compare with a workout in the gym for various reasons. I think there's the environment there. When you're in a gym or you're in a group class, you feed off the energy of the instructor, of your fellow members who are working out. It's what keeps you going. For many people also, if you track back to pre-COVID days, their time at the gym was actually their me time. It was time that they could leave the home or leave the office, do their own workouts. And we had this feedback from members. It was strange. They said, now I have to do my workouts at home in front of the TV, and my family's watching me, and they're sitting down and watching me do this workout, and they see me jumping all over the shop. They've never seen me doing this. I feel a little bit embarrassed. And we realized that, for many people, their time in the gyms was their time alone. They could get away from their families, from their friends, do stuff that they wanted to do for themselves. That was their private time. Whether they were there to work out. Sometimes some members were telling us they were there to sort of look at other fit bodies and doing workouts as well. So many people do different things, but one thing that we know is the gyms are not going to go away. But the cost structures for our businesses, for the gyms businesses, were cost structures that we built up pre-COVID. But now that we know what it's going to be like during COVID and in the next few months, what should our cost structures be? So I've asked some of my fellow colleagues in the industry this, and then we're actually having this as an active debate right now. Said, right now we have gyms which we built and we set up pre-COVID. So we're committed to landlords, we've got our staff, etc. But if we had the opportunity to do it today again from scratch, what would the gyms look like? And that's the challenge. That's a very interesting conversation, which is still ongoing and evolving. But yeah, these are some of the lessons that we learned, Steve.
Yeah. There's a question that's come up, and Sean, I'm sorry, I don't want to interrupt you, but a couple questions have come to mind.
Yeah.
Would that be all right?
Of course.
Yeah. So a question came up from somebody in the audience around, how quickly, if the expectation is that this is going to be a protracted crisis and next year isn't looking much better than this year, how quickly should you cut costs to prepare and position is the question. And I guess to that end, I would ask you, how did you respond as a business? Did you all quickly furlough or retrench staff or instructors? How quickly did you respond? Did you try to hold on to them? What was your solution?
What we did straight away when COVID hit, we projected zero income going forward. We didn't know at that point in time in early April how long the lockdown was going to be and how serious it was going to be. And our view was the cost cutting had to be done immediately. So everything that we could do to cut costs, we did. We didn't retrench staff. We did go through several rounds of cost cutting in terms of everybody across the board taking pay cuts, and we did this twice. It's something which all of us did within the industry, but it's also looking at your processes and your costs and expenses. There are many things that you realize that we could do without, and those are where we cut costs. That's the only thing that you could do. We were also somewhat fortunate in that we had the way gym memberships are structured. You pay on a monthly basis, but our members commit to 12-month, 24-month, 36-month contracts. So it's ongoing. So the challenge would then, be how do you continue to get this revenue in? How do you make sure that your members are not suspending or terminating memberships? So communication for us was a big part of it. And we got into this with our members, having them to understand very early on that, if they could support us through this period of time, not suspend or terminate their memberships, that would be very much appreciated. We told them that we're a local business. We've been around for close to 15 years, and we still wanted to be around, make sure they had a place to work out in when we were able to reopen. One thing that we also did is we did a lot of things which was, I think, to show members our appreciation. So we said, for every month that you do not suspend, let us do this. At the end of your contract period, let us give you an extra month free plus one additional month. So for every month where they did not suspend their membership and they continued to pay, we essentially gave them 2 months free of membership. And a lot of members took this up. And because of that, we were able to control our suspensions and our termination rates. So we had to do stuff like that.
Can you share with us how that went? I mean, was it again the same thing where you had to cut costs, people sitting at home without jobs or because they've had to cut their salaries or take voluntary pay cuts? Would this be one of the first things to go, or quite the contrary, because it's health related? They were saying, and they figured, now I'm at home and I have more time, I will up that. In other words, what did you discover from that experiment, and what was the most effective, and maybe if you would, what was least effective? Is there something that just didn't work?
I think the one big thing that COVID has done for the health and fitness industry is that they've highlighted the importance of health and staying fit as being probably the best guard against COVID-19 for the time period right now before a vaccine is found. And because there has been so much focus on this, I think people were quite happy to say, I'm going to be exercising, and if this gym membership, if the fees are not going to be prohibitively expensive, and I can still see that I'm still getting some value out of it. So we were engaging members and telling them how to do so health tips and nutrition tips and stuff to encourage them to keep on moving, to keep on working out, through whether it's to access our online content or just to go out there, go have a walk, go have a run and do something else. I think they were quite happy with that. Fortunately for us, I think the period of lockdown was not too long also. Things might have been different if I think the lockdown was a protracted one. Over a period of time, we might have seen suspension or termination requests go up. But I think 2.5 months, it was manageable. And the good thing is the government gave us advance notice. So we could, as soon as we knew from the government that we could reopen, we passed on those messages to the members and they were able to tell. And I think they put this in their budget. They were okay with that.
Yeah. Sean, in terms of messaging, what resonated most with your clients and with your customers? Was it, hey, we're a local business, support us locally, we don't want to go under, we want to be here when we come out of this? Or was it, your health is important, we're here to support you? Or was it value, simply the idea that you were prepared to give an extra month? I'm just curious if you kind of parsed that to find out what played best. What were people most receptive to?
I think if you ask me, I think they were most receptive to the fact that uppermost in their mind, health and fitness was most important. They had tried out online workouts. They knew that, yeah, this is a temporary measure, we'll do it, but they were all looking forward to coming to the gym. Many of our members are members which have been with us for many, many years. We've built up a community within the gyms. They have relationships, great friendships with fellow members, with the instructors and all of that. And they were really looking forward to that. So I think that's what kept things going. And they could see, by the way we were communicating and that messaging, we were being very open and communicative to them. We were holding nothing back. We were telling them exactly what it was, right. And I think they appreciated that. So very much like, for the rest of the consumer type businesses, when this hit, there was a willingness to also support local. They could appreciate the fact that we were no different from other businesses. We were going through a hard time. If they could help support it, they would, and they did.
Yeah. You raise a really important point, which is increasingly, and this has been a trend that's moving for 3 to 5 years now, transparency is a virtue. So lots of businesses that prior were trying to just do their business, serve their customers, but then protect or safeguard what's going on internally, have discovered that there's an element of empathy, which actually arises if you say, we're doing our very best. We'll never get it right. We are imperfect. Whether our products, are tainted or something happens, they're just this honest communication of a situation can endear and engender support. And that's not a typical, particularly a large corporate, process doesn't always allow for that. Small businesses are in a unique opportunity to share that. And I think we would encourage everyone to do that to the degree they feel they can without looking pleading or desperate, because I think there's another, there's a downside to that as well. Another question is coming for you, Sean, and maybe I'm not sure I understand this term, but maybe you will. It says, while brick and mortar could be here to stay, do you see your business going into container gyms?
No, we don't. There are these container gyms. So I think the member from the audience was referring to these shipping containers that have been converted into gyms. I think the reality is that we looked at it some years ago. The cost for setting that up, for maintaining that, does not justify it, or it didn't then. We don't think that we will move in that direction. We think that we will still pretty much have gyms quite looking the way ours are right now. We might make certain modifications in the future, but I don't think we'll go the way of container gyms.
Right. It speaks to one of your costs are obviously real estate. And now I'm just curious, do you feel like given the situation, there will be an opportunity for you and other retailers to renegotiate? And I think a lot of the commercial property owners are probably looking around, figuring out if everybody's working from home, do they need office space we need before, and therefore will they err on the side of being more accommodating with retailers as kind of an anchor tenant, if you will? Do you anticipate that, or do you believe that the real estate market in Singapore is going to hold firm throughout?
My own sense is I don't think the real estate market will hold firm throughout. I think, but for the time being, they are. So the landlords are trying to hold on. I mean, they've just come out of a situation where, you know, the 4 months, the government has announced that tenants are going to get 4 months of rental relief: April, May, June, July. And 2 of those months were going to be from the government, and 2 of the months was going to be from the landlord. So it's going to be sort of a shared burden. But rental relief was going to be passed on to the tenants. So I think landlords have just come out of that. I think they felt the pinch there. But I think that the difficulty for landlords will be this: they come out of that hoping or thinking that they can go straight on and they can charge 100% rentals back again from the months of August onwards. But the reality is, businesses, as we are allowed to open and reopen, our sales levels, our revenue levels are not what it used to be. The rentals that we signed on to were pre-COVID. So if we don't have those numbers to support the rentals, and rentals typically were, you know, for retail or F&B would be easily, you know, 30+% of your costs, and that's a huge number, you know. So I think the landlords are increasingly going to face pressure from the tenants to have the rentals renegotiated or various creative structures. For the most part, I think they're still holding out, but I will say this: they are willing to talk. Maybe we're in a fortunate position where we are anchor tenants in most of the malls. Most of our gyms are between 25,000 to 30,000+ square feet. So we're large tenants. So the landlords do speak to us and communicate with us. But I think there is a need for rentals in general to be looked after. I mean, I will also say something which I think was sort of opaque, or maybe the government or the landlord or the government missed this or didn't really realize that this was important, and the landlord sort of closed an eye. What I'm referring to is this: when the government says they'll give us rent relief for the 4 months, what they really mean is they're going to give us rent relief on the base rent. For most of us, when we sign on a lease agreement, your rent is broken up into base rent and service charge and advertising and promotion contributions. So your service charge and A&P contributions, by and large, generally would comprise maybe 20-odd to 30-odd% of the whole rental component. So when the government and the landlords are passing on this rent relief to you, they're only going to give you rent relief for the base rent. What is specifically excluded is service charge and A&P contributions, which means that for the 4 months that we were shut down and not able to operate, we still have to pay 20-odd 30% of the full rent, which is service charge and A&P. Right. That's a burden. So it was already difficult then, and now when rents are now back to 100% of, and the landlords are trying to get us to pay 100% again, it's tough.
Are there any, based on your experience and the way the government has come in to support, are there any thoughts or suggestions you make on how to tweak those government support services in terms of how they do it, or how they deploy, or how they support, or the amounts that they offer? Anything that was missed, perhaps, in you as a small business owner, or not so small, but you somebody who's large real estate footprint? I think it's maybe everyone's trying to figure out, how am I going to cut this cost, right? Like you say, 30% for your business. Any thoughts on that?
Well, I will start by saying I think the government support measures have been, by and large, amazing. I don't believe we've seen any government in the world that has been so forthcoming and so quick in giving out, support. And they've tried to look at every single sector and try to address everybody's issues and concerns. But obviously, when you're trying to roll out a policy or financial budget or some sort of assistance, sometimes you might miss out a few areas. And we're in the process of highlighting to the government, some areas that they have missed out. Our industry specific, for example, when you have one of the main support measures is your job support scheme, right? Your JSS. For earlier period of time, you had JSS support, especially for aviation, tourism sectors at 75% of salaries up to $4,600 a month. Then you had 75%, you had 50% tier, you had a 25% tier. And recently, earlier this week, DPM Heng announced there's new JSS support and there's a new structure for that. For my industry, which is not a small industry, it's fitness and wellness. There are loads of small businesses. There are big gyms like us, but there are also many small businesses, and we support an ecosystem where we service members. We're estimating members of about 500 to 600,000 members in Singapore actively going to the gyms and studios. What has happened for our particular sector is, whilst we've not been put in the same tier as retail and F&B, we've been put in the tier below. So in the early JSS scheme, when retail and F&B were getting 50%, we were getting 25% JSS. And it didn't make sense because we operate very much like a retail and F&B business. We are located in exactly the same places as they are in shopping malls. We're paying the same kinds of rental. And if you think of a business model, we're no different from them. But, we were in a different tier. So we have an ongoing, discussion with the government on how we could possibly elevate our tier and have the fitness and wellness industry being treated in the same tier as retail and F&B. I think that's important because the other thing it does is it sends a message, because if health is really that important, and it is during this period of time, health, fitness is going to help us build our immunity naturally, and it's going to help us combat the virus. And this is really going to be a longer term fix. It's better than just sitting down and hoping for a vaccine to come. In the interim, how do you boost your immunity? Is by exercise. But by relegating us to the lowest tier, and I don't think this was deliberate or conscious on the government's part, but by us being put on the lowest tier, I think it doesn't send the right message out. So what we are hoping as an industry to do is just to inform the government that this is something which we think may have fallen through the cracks. We should be up there with the retail and the F&B. We are an essential service. We play a very important supporting role for people to build their health and their fitness, their immunities. So that's one of the areas, Steve.
Well, it's great. And maybe there are members of the government out there who are listening to this right now and taking notes. So that's an excellent point. And I'm glad we asked it and you raised this. And as a sidebar, it's interesting to me because in the public dialogue, whether it's here or in other countries, we hear lots about social distancing, health and safety measures, and anticipation of vaccines and medical support. But we hear very little about what individuals could and should be doing for their own benefit in terms of boosting their immune system, remaining healthy. We know that COVID affects people who have pre-existing conditions more than those who are healthy. And that's now the data that's available to us. So the degree to which we could, start a campaign, Get Healthy Singapore, and make sure that people have access to fitness is probably a very beneficial thing, but it doesn't seem to be getting the same airtime. Right. I see that. Hey, Vaughn, I don't know if you're still with us, but I'm just curious, you referenced that in some of your slides in terms of anything related to wellness and health was kind of top priority for consumers. And I'm just wondering, outside of Singapore, in the region, any thoughts on real estate or opportunities for retail to renegotiate those terms?
Yeah, I'm not a real estate expert, so I don't want to go down a pathway where it's more opinion rather than fact. but we've tried to renegotiate many of our real estate agreements. And what I would say is in Southeast Asia, landlords are pretty stubborn. They feel great levels of confidence that the market will return to whatever growth levels they have seen in the past will happen rather quickly. And we haven't had much success at a personal level in terms of the company in the real estate area. However, there's no doubt that we're not going to be back in the office in the same way that we were beforehand. We did a study globally that suggested that the workforce in the office on any day will reduce by up to 60%. Right? And you don't realize the impact of this until you start to think about the guy that owns the sandwich shop, or the person that owns the noodle shop down the road that relies upon one office building, or the 7-Eleven store that has people walk through it every morning that goes past, or the florist where near the office where I pick up the flowers to take home to my wife for being late every night from work. You know, these sort of things are going to be impacted dramatically. Laundromats, simple categories. I know, Steve, not to embarrass you, but clearly you don't shave like some of us.
No.
But men are going to shave less, right? We're not going to wear the same levels of deodorant. There's categories that are just going to be destroyed because of not working from the office more and more. So the impact of that is enormous.
Yes, absolutely. Very interesting. We have a question from the audience, and I'm glad this has been raised. Prior to COVID, we saw rising awareness among consumers in the field of sustainability. They were making purchasing decisions based on whether or not a group was ESG compliant or sustainability aware. You could see this shift happening in the US and Europe and creeping into Asia quite rapidly. So the question here is, as people stay and work from home more, what impact do you think this will have on the same sustainability efforts or efforts to slow or address climate change? In other words, is this on the consumer's mind? Or do you believe that this is faded to the background because it's no longer as essential as it was before in some people's minds? Any thoughts from any of you?
I just think from my perspective, in Southeast Asia especially, we talk a lot about it, but we don't walk the talk. You know, you only have to go to your local beaches, and even in really smart areas like Singapore, you see some of the beaches and some of the trash on the beaches. It shocks me and astounds me. We still put a lot of packaging on products. We still, you still go to other Southeast Asian markets and are given straws and plastic cups and stuff that's not biodegradable. It astounds me. So people will claim that they buy because of this, but the actual behaviours don't follow their claims, which is alarming, I think.
You know, it's interesting in this. A lot of our clients are now talking about this and looking at this period to reboot their processes and their systems, if for no other reason but to cut cost and become more efficient. So if before they weren't really thinking about the packaging and some of the other kind of maybe less sustainable practices, now they are, if only because that can help them become more efficient in the market. What do you think about that? Is that something that you're seeing? And Jonatas, maybe this is something you could chime in on, given your business and what you do, and we're going to come to you in a minute on some of your work.
Yeah, I think there are I'm sorry. There are different aspects of that, right? So if you think about globally in terms of sustainability, and again, we touched about circularity as such, right? But there are also aspects associated with CO2 emissions, the roles of different packaging solutions that we bring perhaps overseas with a very heavyweight materials like glass and so on and so forth. So sustainability is a big topic. If we focus a little bit on circularity, right, what we see is it is here to stay. The big brand owners are not changing their speech because of COVID-19. Obviously, COVID-19 have changed, I think, a little bit in the short term, the focus on the mindset of people. Yeah, people are much more conscious about the quality of their food, the healthy aspects, where does it come from? Is this properly packaged? We just discussed about the Apple again, and so on and so forth. So in the very short term, there are fundamental aspects that are affected. So people are less prone to think about circularity as such. But we definitely think that this is here for to stay, right? And fundamentally, again, when you're talking about sustainability, there are different aspects of that. Again, packaging is necessary in many cases to avoid that you have food wastage, right? That you transport food in the right way. And that's another aspect of sustainability. As such, there are studies that say that 30% of food that we produce are actually wasted through the value chain. The question is, how do we maintain a certain level of packaging and how to guarantee that there's circularity, right? And I'll touch that on when I'm talking a little bit about Borouge efforts.
Yeah, and why don't we do that? Why don't we shift across? But before we do that, we have one last survey question. And if you don't mind, Emlyn, if you put that up for the audience. Yeah. So basically, as a result of the COVID-19 crisis, what is the biggest change you will make in your business? And here we would ask you, I know there may be many changes, but of all these options, what's the one that ranks top for you, number one? And we'll give you a few seconds to think and respond on that. That's interesting. So the idea is to either cut costs or invest. And it looks like there's a strong feeling that investing in new technology and building new partnerships, which puts a positive spin on the opportunities here. That's good to see, and very pleased to see that. I think cutting costs, there's no avoiding it. I think you need to make short-term decisions for sure, but longer term, there's no replacement for expanding and thinking innovatively and creatively. So with that, Jonatas, if you wouldn't mind introducing just your business and the work you do, and we're shifting now a little into the B2B world, which I know will speak to many of you in the audience.
Yeah. No, of course, first of all, I would like to thank the Singapore Chinese Chamber of Commerce to have this opportunity to talk. I'll try to frame the discussion a little bit by starting to talk what is Borouge, while very likely many of the products that we produce in the end of the day are in front of you in many cases. Basically, Borouge, it's a company that is on innovative plastic solutions, right? So we produce basically innovative plastic solutions that then go to a converter that produce perhaps a packaging that then goes finally to Unilever or any brand owner to package a product that goes finally to consumer, right? That's one part of the value chain. So we have a global footprint together with one of our owners, that is Borealis. But our focus is basically in Asia. We have production facilities coming in Abu Dhabi, and we basically distribute all across Asia. What I think is unique about Borouge in the context of Singapore is that we elected Singapore to be our global head office for the sales and marketing company, right? So that puts us in a bit on a different frame. Many of the companies actually have head offices or regional red offices in Asia. We actually have the global head office in Singapore that kind of speak to the fact of how Asia is important for us. From business verticals, we act in energy and energy solutions, right? Infrastructural businesses, pipes, basically a lot of infrastructure, mobility. These are three businesses that I'm happy to perhaps answer questions from, but I will not touch it too much. The other three verticals that are extremely important, specifically on the COVID-19 crisis as well. One is healthcare. Yeah, so we obviously, everybody that have been in a hospital have seen an IV bottle, and an IV bottle obviously in many cases, or majority of the cases, is made of our solutions or plastics. Agricultural businesses, and we discussed a lot, and I'm sure that the discussions will be around packaging because that's the more B2C aspect of our businesses. Through COVID, many of these businesses have been considered essential. Obviously, you cannot do value chains of food without proper packaging. So both Borouge as such, but also the value chain players, the converters, were also allowed to operate up to a very large extent, although some of them have received obviously demand variations as well. Yeah, so that kind of put a bit of a frame in Borouge, and I think I want to talk to this audience about three things that I think are part of our strategy DNA and how do they sit together with this COVID-19 story, right? One, I think it's the power of having a diverse portfolio, and I'll touch a little bit more in details on that. The second one is to change and how change is accelerating. Yeah, we have heard that, and I think it applies to us a lot as well. And I think the third piece is to keep an eye on the long term. Yeah, there is a lot of things that are going on right now, and we need to survive. Obviously, many companies need to, but the long-term aspect of should not be left apart, because many of the companies will actually be much better suited in the future. Right? So if you go specifically on the power of the diverse portfolio as such, right? Baruch, what we have experienced through COVID-19 crisis. We have businesses across the different geographies, as I have mentioned to you. And we all know this started in China. So you have a ramp down of businesses in China. We have a lot of lockdowns going on. While this happened, all the other businesses were still thriving, right? And that allowed us to actually reposition the business relatively fast. Again, we have discussed about the value of the global supply chains on these businesses, but basically we were able to reshift very quickly and maintain the level of production and productivity going on through that. And what we are seeing now is, while these events associated with COVID have migrated, China emerged back from that relatively fast if you compare with other countries. And obviously then demand is boosting back in China, what allows us to, again, compensate part of the business that we are seeing through that geographical distribution. I think the second piece of the puzzle here is, although businesses are considered essential, so packaging as such have not fundamentally changed. If you go to even within packaging, there are different verticals, right? We all experience that on what do we buy, cleaners, materials for hygiene are different type of packaging solutions than perhaps rice, food, and associated products, right? And the fact that we play in so many of these different fields, again, guarantee stability, right? I think that is a very strong aspect. On top of that, Baruch is a bit unique on the sense of how much of our portfolio is actually not only on packaging solutions, but actually, again, on infrastructure, energy, and especially healthcare solutions on this pandemic. And you see in some of them booming, some of them reducing, right? So that the resilience caused by these different businesses is very, very important. And I think it's perhaps a lesson learned that we already prepared. I saw my CEO say yesterday that we all know that crises will come. We don't know exactly when, but the history has proven that perhaps there's some level of cyclicality and crises come, right? And we have seen 2008, we have seen previous crises as well. The question is, how do you prepare your business to be able to sustain on that period and actually to thrive? And I think this diversity of portfolio, I think, is very, very important to think about for the companies that are part of the community today. I think a second aspect, Steve, I cannot hear you.
Yeah, may I ask a question about that? Was that anticipated? So in other words, are you saying the diversity of your portfolio was in planning for the inevitable?
I wouldn't say planning for crisis.
Yeah.
But I think there's a very clear strategic component,
right,
of a business like ours that is global and have a global footprint to maintain that diversity, right? So you might, in some cases, you might try to optimize your businesses by perhaps moving too much on one direction versus another direction. And I think that thought of having this portfolio diverse has always been permeated as part of our strategy, yes.
Yeah, okay. And I guess also other learnings about how you've made adjustments since the crisis has struck in terms of operations or headcount or personnel, or even, you know, the way that you organize and your teams would be interesting for people who are operating B2B businesses.
Yeah, no, a couple of aspects on this. So first of all, through the crisis, and we have basically a crisis structure, we have people that are responsible for that. I'm one of them, the crisis chairmen, let's put it this way. We set two very strong priorities, right? One of them was to protect our people. And we anticipated many of the government moves regarding moving people to work from home, reducing these aspects and so on and so forth. And I will touch perhaps on the second aspect is this required some investments in technology, some pre-investments that we anticipated very, very fast to allow that to happen, right? The second aspect is, again, to protect the business as such, right? Fortunately, from an overall business point of view, volumes are still relatively okay. There's no major concern regarding to that. If you follow specifically our businesses, prices have different effects, have oil impact as such as well, have other global demand and supply issues that the prices have reduced, yeah? But in general terms, it's not necessarily 100% correlated with COVID-19, although you could argue that oil has also been correlated with COVID-19.
Yeah, you're referring to the decline in oil prices prior to the
Yeah, of course, yeah, and the return of oil prices as such. But if you think about it, answering your questions, what have we adopted, right? We had these two very strong priorities in mind, again, to protect the people that are working with us, the whole community, and to protect the businesses, because we also believe, or we know that our businesses are essential on that kind of circumstances. We moved people obviously working from home. There's absolutely no major movements regarding retrenchment and so on, but to protect that, I think it's extremely important. And we recently have done a survey to check what are the capabilities of Borouge and how are we perceived by our own employees regarding COVID as well. And we were very positively, the response from our employees were very positive in many of these aspects, including how did we react to that, right? Obviously, there are aspects including working capital, rethinking on supply chains, redesigning of movement of goods, that again, I reinforce what I said, they were acted upon. It doesn't mean that they were not prepared for. Yeah, so it's not like reacting without having a proper thought in advance of how to react to or to respond to this kind of events. Again, we have seen demand shifts from regions like China to other regions and then coming back to China strongly. We also saw that some customers, and that perhaps is a bit more long-term, I'll touch on the third point, are seeing positive impact of China-US relationships at this point in time. So Southeast Asia perhaps becomes a positive hub on that discussion, right? And I think we are fortunate enough to have prepared a supply chain that is resilient and that is capable of adaptation on these kind of circumstances. So we were prepared for it. We kind of act upon on some of the plans that we already had.
Yeah, whereas there's that contingency, I guess there was always in the last 18 months, because of the trade tensions and everything else, a shift to Southeast Asia. But what you're saying is that now that China is activated, the economy is coming back strongly, and there's looser rules around operations. Are we seeing a return of supply chains and a shift back?
No, I think there are different aspects of what will happen, right? I think it's very difficult to predict the different consequences. What we hear, especially from customers, is that the companies are actively thinking about it. Yeah, not only us, but I mean, the final value chain players are actively
about returning engaging. To China. Oh, interesting. Okay, all right.
I think one aspect that we hear a lot about is, again, perhaps nationalization of some production, supply chains, and so on and so forth. I also saw a paper a couple of weeks ago about actually that resilience could be brought through diversification of that supply chains, right? So diversification of sources. And as we all know, Singapore plays an extremely important role on this network of suppliers. You mentioned in the beginning of your talks about perhaps thinking as Singapore as a certificate of origin, right? That could be expanded as a thought, not necessarily for Singapore, but for Asian, as Bohayan has mentioned. But perhaps Singapore could play an active role on developing the technologies to allow that to happen. Yeah, that packaging is produced at source, and actually that that material is guaranteed between brackets through blockchain technologies and so on and so forth. So we see this emergence of a rethinking around how to guarantee sustainability and origin of products. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Interesting. Sean, any other questions from the panel? Curious because there are a couple things that are coming up, but I just want to give others an opportunity to ask. Nothing more? Yeah. A little bit about, I think one of the questions here is whether government safe measurements rules are too tight, are not practical, especially when, you know, there's like this allowances for gatherings of 5 and the restaurants are largely open and, you know, people can still but yet operationally in terms of working from home or factories or, you know, do you feel like relative to what you see in other parts of the world, Singapore has figured out the right balance, or would you advise or recommend adjustments in that area?
Are you asking me or are you asking?
Yeah, sorry, apologies.
Yeah, no, it's okay. So our manufacturing locations are not in Singapore, right? So we are very much affected by, let's say, the network and the supply chain that is built in Singapore.
Yeah.
And on that extent, I can only say positive things, right? The ability for the network that is built in Singapore to operate has been very, very good. I mean, the transparency and the discussions that we have received are very positive on that aspect. From industry players that are similar to us and industry associations, I don't hear any specific negative comments. I think that the Singapore government, again, has already been mentioned, is exemplary on understanding what is going on and being proactive and being very open on what is happening. And I think from our side, again, production locations come from Abu Dhabi, and Abu Dhabi government has also been extremely proactive and extremely positive. You likely have seen that aspect in the news. Things are very much under control there as well. So that allows us to, again, guarantee that customers feel comfortable, and with the products that we produce.
Let's talk a little bit about technology on the B2B side, right? We hear e-commerce, lots of you know, well-regarded and highly publicized solutions for the B2C space, but B2B, everything from inventory, warehouse management systems, right down through operation efficiencies. Are there things that you're doing in your organization or developments you're aware of within the B2B space, which you might advise B2B players in Singapore to consider?
Yeah, no, I think, again, it touched my second point that change is accelerating, right? So many of the things that we have perhaps thought that would happen in 3 years have been accelerated extremely fast, right? From technology of communication and such to other aspects of digitalization on the supply chain. Perhaps one comment for the people that are attending is what we have seen is a change on behavior from that perhaps similar companies as yours, right? So SMEs, where there was a behavior to avoid technology as a method of communication. And obviously we would also not produce that because we will not push something that the industry is not necessarily ready to. Yeah. So there's always this dance and dialogue of how much do you move and so on. I think this is accelerating incredibly. And the many companies have actually realized that virtual contacts are actually more beneficial. I'll give you an example, right? We have a customer that we normally would provide, I don't know, a technical advice or technical service discussion, and we would go to the premises of that specific customer, right, to discuss about it. Through virtual technology, this allows that customer not to run that only on the specific factory that we were in, but the customer also have perhaps 2, 3, 4 factories. So it allows much more people to get to know and understand our products in a better way, right? Mm-hmm. So I think there's a shift in mindset, and what I would suggest is take that opportunity to rethink both with your customers, but actually also with your suppliers, how to make the relationship more efficient. It's beneficial for both. Yeah. And in many cases actually our you will find better solutions, technology solutions, right? Associated with the way that we are dealing with the businesses under COVID-19. Many of them are here to stay. I don't think that the consumer behavior will return, as has been mentioned, but also the B2B discussion behavior will remain. And we see this acceleration of supply chain solutions also being extremely heated as well, right? Because everybody wants the same at this point in time, I would say, in terms of traceability, in terms of origin, and guarantee that you have visibility of the supply chains. This is accelerating, and we see a point of no return, basically because it was already anticipated would happen. You're just making the investments much faster than it used to be.
Right. And I think it's, and Vaughn, you might have thoughts or comments on this. It's no mystery that B2B tends to be a laggard versus B2C when it comes to some of these technology, not the core technologies, but whether it's relationship or external or networking technologies. And so many of the B2B, clients that I've worked with are fanatic about this relationship driven. My suppliers, my customers, we've known each other for years. It's been in generations. Why would that change? I think it's relying on that in a crisis is probably not advisable. That now things are changing, and so what a lot of B2B organizations don't understand is the degree to which you can, as you're advising, improve those levels of communication, becoming more transparent, making available, anticipating, showcasing, acknowledging there's going to be blocks or shortages or issues in advance of having a problem and then dealing with it after it occurs. So those communication processes, which is both a process and a technology to support it, to think a little more outside the box on that. Vaughn, do you have anything to add on that?
Yeah, I think one of the real key areas here, I treat it like my iPhone. When I download an app, I'm not willing to do a 4-day workshop on how to use the app. We want intuitive technology right now, right? We're extremely time poor, and the software or the technology that we're going to use has to be simple and easy to use or explain. If it takes me too long, I stop using it. Right. And I think that's the same for technology in all the B2B and B2C areas. We're no different. We're not willing to invest time in training or development. In fact, the world's becoming more about product than service. And that's really the challenge for many service-driven businesses today. How can we actually drive more of a product solution while providing still that service without having to have the engagement at the level that we're used to? So do I have a person that I can dial up? Does it have to be Sean every time I dial for the gym? Or can it be a chatbot? Or can it be someone 24/7 that comes back to me? Consumers are far more, and businesses for that matter, are far more understanding of that availability and time.
Yeah. I mean, dashboards, I think are a helpful thing where, a customer can just log in, see what the status is, accounts receivable, stock, so they don't have to go and find somebody and wait for an answer. And it's terribly frustrating, when you've got to move quickly, or if you've got an issue. Just creating efficiency for your customers, if not for yourself, can be one of those sticky elements that actually keeps them close. So these are some of the things.
I think perhaps just a quick comment on this. I think there are the two aspects. It's not replacing necessarily, but building on. Yeah. Right. So this need for relationship, again, we are big corporations in many cases, right? This need to have a discussion and have trust on people that you are discussing with and have this relationship. I don't think it will disappear. The question is, how do we enhance that through technology, right? How do we replace the more operational aspects of it? But fundamentally speaking, how do we enhance that negotiation and relationship? That's, I think, that the main trend.
Yeah, I'm hearing two things. I mean, with some, who have long time relationship driven enterprise sales forces who are very proud of building those relationships, in this time are discovering that customers really don't want to have, the lunches or the long discussions or your needs. They just need immediate response. And so in some of these discussions we're having with the CEOs running these businesses, they're saying they're anticipating that they will be probably retrenching up to half of their sales organizations in the next 2 to 3 years because the world has changed and they're trying to drive their costs down. They're trying to provide transparency. It's not the preferred solution. It's not what they would like to do, but the world has changed and they need to manage their costs as well. Any thoughts from you all about that? Because I'm hearing more and more of this, and that also leads to the conversation around automation and bringing technologies in to automate some of those core functions, whether it's front desk, reception, anything that does with customer engagement, call centers, which have been used, an outsourced but also insourced. Any views on whether B2B should be moving towards more of an automated approach, or whether or not, it's just like manage your costs as best as possible, create that parallel opportunity and hope that you're able to weather this?
Yeah, perhaps I'll take it quickly and then we perhaps move. Again, the way that I see is, or that we see is the relationship is perhaps changing. And you cannot rely purely on the social aspects of your relationship for commercial aspects. And honestly speaking, I don't think that haven't ever happened as much, right? This is obviously a big component, but we at least have very technical sales force that understands the quality of the product. And I come back to what Vaughn has mentioned around selling the product and understand what you are doing and so on and so forth. So again, it is not necessarily about reducing, it's about rethinking how these elements will need to adapt to a world where, again, there will not be a dinner, but still the need for relationship, the need for communication is extremely important.
Other thoughts, Vaughn or Sean?
I'm not sure you can give up on salespeople. That's the real challenge, right? I think if the product's right, you need more and more salespeople rather than less.
Yeah.
That's my one concern is there's a plethora of products on the market right now. How you get that engagement with your clientele, whether it's a consumer or a business, is still a critical part. I just think that the methodology we're using to sell is going to change dramatically, and the after sales service levels are going to change dramatically as well. So I'm still, if I was talking to a 21-year-old and I was saying they're going to get into sales, I would encourage them still. There's still a real need for salespeople.
There's hope for sales. Well,
yeah.
That's good news. All right, which does, to your last comment, it segues nicely into a question we have from the audience, which is brand, importance of brand. In this time, are consumers more or less attuned to brand, or is it really value versus brand?
It's both. You can't have one without the other, right?
Both. You're going to have to choose.
No way am I choosing on that. You've got to have both, right? Okay. Yeah, the value proposition that in a service-driven organization, we always talk about 3 areas. We talk about price, quality, and let me start again. Quality, speed, and price. Price can be misinterpreted as value, right? And ultimately, you can't have all three in a business. If you're the customer, you want them all, but you don't get all three. One comes at the compromise of another. You guys might shake your head and say, I deliver all three, but I doubt anyone does, right? When it comes to competition. And that's the challenge for everyone out there. How do you build a brand that has that quality emphasis that will supplement for one of the other two? You can read all the various marketing, branding books in the world. They tell you that this is the real challenge. And you see this in retailing all the time. The big discounters that are appearing around the world, they compromise on some level, whether it's on the quality message, whether it's on the branding message as well, for the sake of price. It's a huge challenge, particularly in FMCG that I deal with a lot.
That's great. That's excellent. All right. We are coming up to the end of the session pretty quickly. I thought we could, if there are any other questions for the audience, this would be your time to ask. And if not, we could do a quick wrap on this. And if there's any kind of concluding comments or thoughts that any of you will have, I'd encourage that. Is there anything that you all would like to share that we haven't touched on or that I haven't raised at this point? Or why don't we quickly recap? Because I think there's some wonderful insights that have been shared with everybody today. And on on the general, the B2C and the product space, I think we're hearing very clearly that there is an opportunity here to, build a local brand, to become more reliant, and also to promote yourself in the market as a group which is locally grounded, locally founded, and locally supported. The degree to which you can build community around that is a great way of offsetting to some degree any reliance you had on overseas or neighboring markets in the past. Singapore is a small market, and therefore there are limitations. There are going to be winners and losers. There's no getting around that. The degree to which you can apply technologies, build your e-commerce practices, create community, and also dialogue with any of your existing or future customers is essential. I think you are going to see probably a reduction, as I mentioned, in the number of available items on shelves, because retailers are all thinking of ways of optimizing, reducing their costs, managing their inventories, increasing turns. And then there are certain areas, I think, within Singapore, which are showing some interesting possibilities relating to food security or dining experiences or retail experiences. Vaughn mentioned the way that customers, if they are going to go into the market, they want more space. They don't necessarily want to be in confined environments. There is room for specialization and actually branding around specialized categories. But also, to I think Vaughn's point, people don't want to be overwhelmed with multiple delivery options. So consolidation and making sure that you're working through consolidators for final mile delivery is important. I think Sean was wonderful in sharing with us, some of the challenges he's faced running a B2C services. There are clearly costs that he has to assume, and that's not going to change overnight. It's people and it's real estate, the degree to which the property owners are prepared to negotiate or reduce is anybody's guess. That they demonstrated, I think, at least here in Singapore, a determination to hold at certain pricing levels and not fold. We'll just see what happens with that going forward. I think the idea of having a hybrid approach, Sean mentioned, between what you do online. There's nothing that you can do to replace a great workout experience among others that motivate you, but there's simply going to be times and situations where that's not possible. So you better have an online or a virtual solution for that as well. Pricing models are changing as well. How you price, how you incentivize, how you encourage people to stay the course, particularly when they're membership fees or long-term contracts. The worst thing to happen is to lose customers. Getting them back is twice as hard. So holding on to them, even if it means discounting in the near term, would be an advisable strategy. When it comes to the B2B market, Janata shared with us that shifting supply chains and diversification of product groups and divisions is helpful, because there will be certain product groups or product categories which are up in good times and down in bad times. He's mentioned healthcare products as well as packaging. Some will be simply unaffected by this. There's also this question that came up around sustainability and whether or not in a time like this will people become less or more conscientious around sustainable aspects of products or services. Research we do would suggest that it's a rising issue and concern. It's not going away. To the degree to which it can help you reduce your costs or manage your costs more effectively is great, but also the ongoing benefits of consumer choice as it relates to sustainability is important as well. Those are my key takeaways from the session. I'm sure I missed a few things in there. There's lots of wonderful insight and advice. But if there are additional questions, please feel free to submit them. We'll try to follow up. I think Emmeline will be able to get questions to us. And if there are no further questions from the audience, we'd like to thank you all for attending, and I'd like to thank the panelists.
Thanks, Steve.
Thanks so much. Emmeline, over to you.
All.
Thank you, Steve, Vaughn, Jonathan, and Sean, for your most insightful analysis and open sharing. We had a great discussion for both the B2C and B2B sectors, and we hope that everyone has gained some inspiration and new knowledge to take your business forward. We have now come to the end of this session. Before we end off, There's a message from our SCCCI's membership department. We are offering a special discount for new members sign up before 21st September. The promotion details are on screen. Do call us or email us if you're interested. Finally, please remember to let us have your feedback and comments on SMEICC Live through the feedback survey. You can scan the QR code on screen or follow the redirect link after you have closed this session. This afternoon, we have more exciting tracks and top speakers lined up for you. Please continue to join us on the upcoming tracks. Enjoy your lunch and we'll see you this afternoon. Thank you, everyone. Goodbye.